Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. We're going to begin by hearing the rest of Commander Jerome's evidence.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we are. Can I please call Commander Jerome back? Commander, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming back to us this morning.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn now to your involvement on the night, or rather to turn back to it. Can I ask you please to go to page 13 of your witness statement and look at paragraph 46. I'll just wait for it to go up on the screen. There it is. And you say that you arrived at the Special Operations Room at 4:10 a.m. and you were briefed by Chief Inspector Barrett. And I think it's right, isn't it, that this was your second briefing, having had the first substantive briefing at 2:30.
That's right, yes.
Now, before you arrived at the incident room, which was at Lambeth, were you receiving any updates about the incident?
So on my way in, I received a phone call from Chief Inspector Barrett just giving me an update in terms of just the extent of the fire, but clearly at that point, travelling at speed in a vehicle, there was no way of making any notes, and certainly no way that I could make any decisions at that point.
Right. Did Inspector Barrett tell you, while you were en route, about the change in stay put advice?
No.
Did he tell you anything about the number of casualties or fatalities that were being experienced?
No.
What did he tell you?
Just that the fire was continuing to spread and that it was a very serious incident.
Right. And did you take any actions or make any decisions en route as a result of what he told you?
I did not. I wasn't in the position with a telephone line, which was very difficult to make any decisions at that point, and it wouldn't have been appropriate to do so. Elsewhere in my statement, I set out what the command protocols are for assuming command of an incident, and at that point I was neither in a position to have good communications, neither had I been properly briefed as I would be at 4:10 when I came in, and also my location in a vehicle on a motorway was difficult as well.
Yes. Now you say in your in paragraph 46 that he briefed me on the nature of the incident. This is at the bottom of the paragraph. He briefed me on the nature of the incident, the command structure put in place, the resources being deployed, and the current status of the activations initiated on my earlier call. During that briefing, did he give you any further new information about the incident?
Would it be okay to refer to my notes?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Now, just so we know what those are, I think you're referring to the Jerome log, which is at MET 000023289. Is that what you're referring to as your notes?
Yes, it is, yes.
Okay, and they start, just so we're all keeping up with you, on page 14 internally, and indeed the relativity reference. And I think the part you want to refer to is on page 15, a quarter of the way down the page of the paragraph.
No, I'm sorry. So I'm on page 8 of that document. That's the one, yes.
So that says 0420 briefing from, is that Duane Barrett?
Yes, it's right,
Okay.
yes.
CAD 482. So what would you like to refer us to?
So during the course of that, he's telling me that clearly the call came in at 0116. He's given me the CAD reference, that it was initially a 6-pump fire, the timing of our first units on the scene, the number of MPS units, its location, the Gold Commander, which is Paul Warnett at that point, and then talking through the resources that we've got at the scene, updating me that we believe there to be at least, tragically, 4 people have died, the number of people that we believe had evacuated, The fact that we'd put our callers onto the 999 systems, that we didn't have anybody waiting to come through. That was to give support to the London Fire Brigade. The additional resources that we've got going to that, and then also on some of the activations. So GT staff coming in means that we've got control room staff that are making their way in to activate the special ops room.
Just a couple of things on that page. First of all, a third of the way down the page, you say, or you record everyone onto 999, and then there's no
waiters.
No waiters. So that means that you've got nobody waiting for 999 calls.
That's right.
Does that mean that a command had been given to the Metropolitan Police Control Room, METCC, to take Grenfell calls?
Yes, that was my understanding, and that we had put members of the control room onto the telephone systems to prioritise the 999 calls.
Right. Well, we'll come back to that shortly. It then goes on to say, is this SO19? What is that?
So SO19 is our armed response vehicles.
Right.
So we spoke yesterday that the Territorial Support Group have enhanced training as well as building entry skills. Our armed officers have clearly advanced training as well, and also means of method of entry into buildings as well, should they be required in order to gain access. They weren't there in an armed capacity. I'd like to emphasise that. They're there purely in the case of getting as many resources there as possible in order to have that option available to us should we need to get into people's houses and save their lives.
Now it says here, SO19 going to go due to building collapse. How would you deploy those officers in the event of the collapse of the building or the imminent threat of the building's collapse?
So in making that note, clearly they wouldn't go into a collapsing building, but the danger then to the surrounding area, the building comes down, if we can get people out to save their lives in the buildings around the tower itself.
I follow. So this wasn't a question of sending these particular officers into Grenfell Tower itself?
Absolutely not.
It was the surrounding area that needed to be cleared?
Yes, it was.
Now, just a little bit lower down that page, I don't think you got there, but just 4 lines or 4 entries up from the bottom under the same time mark, which starts at 4:20 at the top, it says, still in rescue mode. Can you remember what Chief Inspector Barrett told you, which led you to write that down there?
So I can't remember specifically, but it's very much into the life-saving phase of an incident. So an incident will have a number of different phases, and clearly we were still in a life-saving phase at that point.
Did he tell you at that stage that the stay put advice, as we've come to call it, had been revoked, and that the advice to all residents was to self-evacuate if they could?
I haven't made a record of that, and so I can't recall that off the top of my head.
You can't, okay. Is there anything else you would like to tell us about that briefing over and above what we can see there on that page?
No, those are my notes that I've made as he's going through briefing me.
Now, just going back a little bit to the timing of this briefing. This briefing, as you've recorded, starts, as we can see at the top of this page, at 4:20, which is 10 minutes after you arrived.
Yes.
As you put your arrival time of 4:10. What allowed you to remember that your arrival time was 4:10, as you said in your statement?
I think it was a case of I checked my watch to see what time I'd actually arrived in the special ops room.
You did that, did you?
Yes.
You have a clear, independent recollection of it being 4:10. Right. Now, you told us yesterday that your phone call with Chief Inspector Barrett, which he'd had with you while you were still at home, started at 2:30, and I think you said yesterday ended at 2:40, 2:45. So it meant that took you an hour and 20 minutes to get from your home to Lambeth, to the GT room at Lambeth.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's right.
Is that time period a function of the distance between your home and Lambeth?
So it will be a combination of the distance and also the fact of then just getting in a position where I'm ready to go. I did consider, so I have a staff officer who lives a reasonable closeness to me, whether I would use him to convey me in or whether I would divert a resource to come down and pick me up and then convey me back in. And certainly my view at that time was to divert a resource that was sorely needed on the night to save people's lives would not be appropriate, and therefore I made the decision that I would call my staff officer.
Right. Were you delayed in any way in getting to the Special Operations Room following the end of your call with Chief Inspector Barrett?
Only making your way through South London, even at that time of the morning, making your way through traffic does impede your progress a little.
Yes. Do you think there should have been someone of your rank available in the GT room at an earlier stage?
This is something which I have given a lot of thought to in terms of those timings, but I was reassured by my phone call early on with Chief Inspector Barrett that certainly the police command structure was in place. We had a gold with an experienced superintendent who was actually on duty at the time, and the call-out procedures for a chief officer to arrive, whilst clearly I will be making command decisions that are looking forward and how we will be managing the incident going forward, that I was confident we've got a command structure in place, gold and silver, and that that was appropriate at that time.
Now, going back to your statement and going back to what you told us a moment ago based on your note, we may need to have both open. You say in paragraph 49 of your statement on page 14, Chief Inspector Barrett further informed me that he had deployed the MPS control room staff onto 999 calls. This meant that there were no callers waiting for their call to be answered. We covered that just a moment ago very briefly, but I just want to explore that a bit more with you, Commander. First of all, was this deployment something that had been done exceptionally by Chief Inspector Barrett?
So it doesn't happen as a matter of routine, but it certainly does happen when there's exceptional volume of calls coming through that we would work with the other emergency services in order to assist them. We also do the same with other police forces as well. So it's not unusual, but it's not common.
Do you know what time Chief Inspector Barrett had deployed the MPS control staff to deal with Grenfell Tower 999 calls?
No, I do not.
Did he tell you?
No.
Do you know whether he'd done so in liaison with the London Fire Brigade?
So whilst I don't know what the precise procedure is, my assumption is you could only do that once you had been in a consultation and a conversation with the London Fire Brigade, because you wouldn't know the volumes of 999 calls and the fact that you had people dialing in on the 999 system.
Right. Do you know whether Chief Inspector Barrett found out from his opposite number or from the control room staff at Stratford, the LFB control room staff at Stratford, what advice the control room staff were giving to 999 callers from Grenfell Tower?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
You don't. Do you know whether he instructed the Met control room staff himself, or whether he delegated that to somebody else?
I'm sorry, I would assume that there was a delegation involved, but I don't know for certain.
Now, you have exhibited as exhibit number 2 to your statement, and it's MET 000023291, a summary. If we can just have a look at that. It's a summary of 999 calls. handled by the MPS control room, or MET-CC, and you've put a column in, as we can see, the second column from the right, which says advice, and then we can see that it tends to vary: evacuate, stay, evacuate, stay, evacuate, stay, etc. When you compiled this summary, did you yourself study each transcript?
No, so that was produced for me, so I didn't go through each and every one, no.
Right. Did you go through any of them?
Not each transcript, no. I went through the summary that was produced for me.
I see. So you didn't cross-check the summary with the underlying transcripts?
No, I did not.
Who prepared this for you? Do you know?
That would have been one of our legal professionals, I believe.
Okay. When you were given this summary and looked at it, as you said you did you note that the advice appears to have varied as between MPS control room staff prior to 2 a.m.?
That's right, it does vary.
What did you take away from noting that?
So my reflections on that are that clearly our operators are listening to individuals on the telephone, and clearly they're wanting to save life as well, and they're wanting to save their lives. And I think that each individual is making an assessment based upon what they're hearing and the call at the time. So whilst I can see that there is stay put advice that people are following, but I can also see that there are individuals, there are call takers that are probably listening to those people on the other end of the line and making an assessment with them to say, look, I think that you do have a chance to get out. So I can see that they're making those flexible decisions based upon what they're hearing at the time, and clearly not rigidly adhering to the advice that had been given to them. And I suspect that in many of those cases they would have actually saved people's lives as well.
Well, from your knowledge, do you know whether or not MET-CC control room staff are trained in how to advise a caller who is calling from a burning building?
I don't know.
Do you know whether they're trained in or have any knowledge of any of the London Fire Brigade's policies on that subject?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I
Okay.
don't know.
On the night itself, did you know or come to learn that the advice that was being given by MET-CC control room staff tended to vary from operator to operator and caller to caller?
No, it wasn't until subsequently.
Right. Would you have expected there to be a consistent approach adopted by MET-CC control room staff?
So our operators are having to make decisions, often life and death, I'm not talking with regards to the fire, but life and death decisions when they're talking to distressed members of the public, and are making those decisions in the very best interests of those individuals they're talking to. So clearly London has been through a very traumatic period in the last 18 months, and many of those operators will have spoken to individuals at the time. They will know what the advice is within those circumstances, but they'll also be assessing and using that advice and applying it to the circumstances that they hear at the time. So our operators are making very fluid judgment calls based upon what they're actually hearing at the time, and not rigidly following a script or a procedure. They're making sure that they're giving the very best advice in the circumstances that they hear, because those circumstances will vary. Yes,
the circumstances will vary, but you wouldn't expect, would you, the policy or the basic ground rules of how to give advice to vary, would you?
So there would be clearly, they make an assessment, and we are, one of the things that we are trained in using is a decision-making model, and one of those is clearly taking into account policies and procedures, but also making sure that you apply those to the circumstances that are presented before you. But there is a consistency in how you arrive at that decision-making process.
Well, it may be, Commander, you can't help me with this, but in your experience, in general terms, how experienced is the Met CC as a control room in giving advice to callers from burning buildings?
That would be, certainly in this instance, quite rare, albeit that, as I said in my evidence yesterday, it is not uncommon to receive fire calls about tower blocks. But in these circumstances, this is very, very rare.
And normally, is this right? Normally, when the Met CC receives a call from a caller in a burning tower block, that would be handed over to the LFB, and it would be then dealt with by their control room.
So I don't know, but certainly in my experience, it wouldn't be quite as cold as that. So the operator clearly is going to take some information from the caller in order to maximise the chances of saving people's lives before then indeed maybe transferring it over.
Well, let me be a bit more specific. Well, is this right, that although the operator might well take initial details, name, address, perhaps the conditions, matters of that nature, when it came to specific advice to the caller, would the Met CC operator then hand the call to the LFB control room, or would they go further and take upon themselves the giving of the advice as to whether to stay or to get out, and to assist the caller in assessing whether it was safe to get out?
I don't know that level of detail. Sorry.
Would you expect the London Fire Brigade to be in contact itself with the Metropolitan Police Control Room, Met CC supervisor, so as to ensure that the advice that was being given by the Met CC's control room about whether to stay or to leave was consistent with the LFB's advice?
So I would expect those conversations to take place, and I would expect that the LFB supervisor would be in contact with us. I don't know on the night in terms of whether those checks in terms of consistency, but clearly I would expect those conversations to be taking place.
Do you have a recollection of when during the night, let me just try this again, do you remember being told during the night that the stay put advice had changed and that the advice was now to evacuate?
I do recall that happening. It was sometime later on, sometime between 0420 and later, but I can't recall exactly when that took place.
Your recollection is that that took place between after 4:20, so after your briefing with Chief Inspector Barrett?
Yes, I can recall, but I haven't made a note of it, that someone did mention that the stay put advice had changed during the course of that night.
And you put your learning moment at after 4:20.
Yes.
Do you remember whether you were told at that time that it had changed earlier or that it had now changed?
No, that it changed much earlier.
Right. And did you discover when that was at that time? You didn't?
No.
Looking at your schedule, if you look at, for example, it's not really an example, but it's the last of them on the page where it says stay at 932 is the CAD reference, time of call 305, advice stay. Caller, this is the police. I'm trying to get someone to you, but you need to tell me where you are. Whoever has read the transcript has interpreted that as a stay, assuming that's right, because I don't think you can help us with that. Were you aware that that was some 15 minutes or so, at least, after the LFB had revoked the stay put advice and was now advising all callers to leave?
Yes, that's right.
Can you account for that? Can you account for why that advice was being given by your control room even at that stage?
No, I'm sorry, I can't.
If, and this is to some extent a hypothetical question, but if in fact the Met CC was giving stay put advice at or around this time, 305, then assuming that that was not the same advice as the advice now being given by the LFB, my question is that consistent with the approach required by the principles of joint working as set out in the JESIP document, the Joint Doctrine Interoperability Framework?
So again, I think it would be useful to actually look at 932 if we do have it available to go through that CAD. But if not, then clearly, in the interests of GESIP and that joint working and the sharing of information, then that clearly should have taken place.
And I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that last part of that.
Then that should have taken place.
Should have taken place, yes. I'm not going to go through CAD 932 because you didn't, and therefore I'm not going to do it with you here now. But I note your answer. Can I turn then to the heli-tele downlink and go back to paragraph 49 of your statement, please, Commander? You say, 4 lines down from the start of that paragraph, the National Police Air Service were requested by the control room to provide assistance. And emergency services are allowed to deploy into such temporary flight restriction zones to help assist with dealing with the incident in accordance with the rules laid down by the Civil Aviation Authority. Now, do you know what specific assistance NPAS, the National Police Air Service, were asked to provide?
So I know that the request was provided to the National Police Air Service to lift earlier on in the evening. I don't know precisely what they were told in terms of the assistance that they would be given, they would ask to be given.
When you say, I think in that last answer, the request was provided to lift earlier on in the evening. That's what the transcriber's taken from your answer. Did you say that?
Yes, so that's a technical term for
What does that mean?
For the deployment of a helicopter.
Oh, I see. Right. So the request is
take
to deploy.
off. Yes, the common phrase would be to take off.
I follow, because that might cause confusion. It caused confusion with me, but not
Sorry.
lift people off a building, but to
Absolutely
lift off
not.
and go to the building.
So as I said yesterday, certainly the police helicopters do not have a rescue function.
Was the deployment of an NPAS helicopter an automatic GESIP response by the police to a major incident?
So it would be a consideration, and certainly in my experience that using helicopters do provide you with an additional perspective on an incident, whether you're dealing with public order or whether you're dealing with a major incident such as this.
Yes, and do you know, as I say, I think I take from your last answer that it's not an automatic GESIP response to a major incident. Does that mean that somebody would then have to apply their mind and make a specific decision
Yes.
in the context of a major incident whether to deploy a helicopter?
Yes.
Do you know who that was?
I don't know.
Do you know why it was?
No, I do not.
Right. Now, can I just ask you to look at CAD 482? I want to ask you about the heli-tele downlink itself. If you go to CAD 482, please, and turn in it to page 22. Just above the bottom of the page, at a time mark of 03:23:36. I'll just wait for it to come up on the screen. That's MET 000023294, CAD 482, page 22. Thank you. Just a little bit above the bottom of the page, at a time mark of 03:23:36, you can see GTASU, FYI, OE21N have 2 portable downlinks on board and en route to scene for LFB and police to view heli-tele pictures. First of all, I think it's right that, as Inspector Thatcher told us yesterday, GTASU was the GT control room at Lambeth.
That's right.
And FYI, I don't know what that means, OE21N, what is that?
So I certainly know what FYI is, which
Yes.
is for your information,
Yes.
but the rest of it, I would presume that's a call sign.
Right, okay. And they have two portable downlinks, as we can read there. Were you made aware at any point that the LFB were not receiving the heli-tele downlink from the helicopters?
No.
So at this point, 3:23, you'd finished your conversation with Chief Inspector Barrett and were en route to Lambeth. Did Chief Inspector Barrett, during his first substantive call with you at 2:30, tell you that there were difficulties in receiving the heli-tele downlink?
No.
Right. Did you get any information while en route that this problem had emerged?
No.
Did you get any briefing from Chief Inspector Barrett when you arrived at GT Lambeth that this problem had now emerged?
No.
Does it come as a surprise to you to find out that there was no operating heli-tele downlink between the helicopter and the LFB's command units?
Clearly, we would expect those to work. I wouldn't expect that information to come directly to me in my role of Gold. I would expect that to be resolved at other levels. But clearly, having a helicopter and having the ability to view the downlink would be of great assistance.
Yeah. And do you know, even now, why the command units at the LFB were not able to receive the heli-tele downlink?
No, I do not.
Do you know why the LFB were not put in direct radio contact with the helicopter pilot?
No, sorry, I do not.
You don't. Do you know whether they should have been?
So on our airwave systems, and clearly I don't know in detail the LFB ones, but there is a facility from ground to air to patch in and speak to the air support unit.
Yes. And do you know why it wasn't used?
No, I do not.
Well, you said a moment ago in your answer that you would expect the curing of the defect with the non-operating heli-tele downlink to be resolved at other levels. Who would you expect to have resolved that issue on the night?
So if there's the ability, clearly, for individuals who know how to operate the technical aspects of that to have done so, my reading of that is that that people were trying to find a workaround in order to work around some of those technical difficulties that were being experienced.
Do you know whether the portable downlinks... Well, let me ask you this. Do you know what these portable downlinks are?
No.
You don't?
No.
Right. Okay. So you won't be able to help me with my next question then, which is why they weren't taken into the command unit and used by the LFB?
No, I do not.
Okay. Do you know if the airwave channel on which NPAS messages were being communicated were available to the LFB?
So I don't know for certain, no.
Do you know
But I
at all?
do know on our police handsets there is a ground-to-air channel, and I would assume that they would be the same for the London Fire Brigade as well.
Yes.
But certainly each handset is programmed slightly differently.
Can I ask you to go to your log of the night, which is MET 000023289, and go to page 8. Near the bottom of the page, you can see just above 5 a.m. it says arranging briefing with Paul Warnett. I think he was the gold from
Yes.
who you took over.
Yes.
So you'd taken over from him. Had you taken over from him prior to 5 a.m.?
Yes, I had.
Okay. So was it that briefing during which you took over from him?
So I took over, I received the briefing from Chief Inspector Barrett. That was at 04:20, so I then considered that I was within the Special Operations Room, that I'd received the briefing, that I was then in a position to assume command.
Right. Now let's
as Gold.
Okay. I'm just going to tie this up then with your statement, paragraph 50 at page 14. Just go back to that. You say there, once I'd arrived at GT and received the briefing from Chief Inspector Barrett at 4:10, I was of the view that command could now transfer to me. I undertook the role of Gold Commander at that point. Did you do so after having had a briefing from Superintendent Warnett?
No, so I assumed command before I had that briefing from Superintendent Warnett.
And, right, when you assumed that role, therefore, you were working on the basis of the briefing given to you by Chief Inspector Barrett?
Yes.
Right. When you had your briefing with Paul Warnett, Superintendent Warnett, was it a detailed briefing?
It was sufficiently detailed for me to confirm what I'd received from Chief Inspector Barrett, and enough for me to confirm that I was making command decisions.
Right. Did he say anything to you about stay put advice at that stage?
Not at that stage.
Did he say anything to you about the problems with the heli-tele downlink?
No.
Do you remember what he did tell you?
So I do think I've got a later conference call that I've recorded with him. I didn't record that that initial briefing that I took before 5 o'clock, which was the first strategic coordinating group with Paul Warnett, so I haven't recorded that, unfortunately.
Do you know what Superintendent Warnett's role was once you'd assumed Gold Command?
Then he would become silver.
He became silver.
Yes.
And does that mean that Inspector Thatcher became bronze, or did he come out of the structure?
So, because of the gold, silver, bronze structure, what you could have with an inspector such as Nick Thatcher, he could then become effectively working with silver. So, yeah, you would only ever have one silver, but clearly because of the continuity, because of everything that was taking place, because of the complexity, the fast-paced nature of the incident, that Nick Thatcher could then assist Mr. Warnett with his discharge of his functions as silver.
Right. I see. Once you had assumed Gold Command, what was your plan?
So my plan was very simply to protect life as much as we could, and I think I've detailed in my notes just very, very briefly what that initial plan was.
Is that at page 8 of MET 000232289?
Yes. So the initial plan is very simply in those very early stages that you would go straight to our core duty, protect and preserve life, and then provide assistance to those individuals who are injured, as well as providing assistance to those individuals who had evacuated.
Right. Now, you say that apart from, well, you say that you were, your role essentially was to attend and chair the strategic coordinating group meetings, and you did those at 5 o'clock a.m. and 6:30 a.m.
That's right, and then continuing throughout the
yes.
that day and the rest of the days.
In addition to those meetings, did you carry out any other actions in your role as Gold Commander?
So everything would come through the strategic coordinating group. There would be elements where silver would come to the police silver. The police silver would come to me, and then we would then agree whatever it was that they come to me, and they would keep a separate record of those.
Now, turning to the strategic coordination meetings, you cover these from paragraph 54 onwards of your statement at the foot of page 15. If I can just ask you please to go to that, Commander. Page 15 of your statement. You say, the first meeting of the strategic coordinating group took place at 5 a.m. This initial meeting was focused on ensuring there was a common shared situational awareness of the incident and was largely concerned with each agency providing a situation report of their response and putting in place an initial multi-agency strategy. When you say an initial multi-agency strategy, do we take from that that there was, until that point, 5 a.m., no multi-agency strategy?
So, my understanding that there was, but clearly what I would need to do is make sure that multi-agency strategy was appropriate given the timescale and the information that we were receiving. A strategy is not a fixed point. It remains flexible and must change according to the updated information that's coming in.
Yes. I just wonder why you used the word initial there in your statement.
So for me, because that would be my first strategic coordinating group, that would be the first multi-agency strategy of bringing all of the London Resilience Forum together. That would be the first opportunity for that to take place. Clearly, that does not prevent that earlier on there is that joint strategy of working together to save people's lives.
So does that mean that before 5 a.m. there was a joint strategy? It just wasn't, as it were, a London Resilience Forum joint strategy?
Yes.
Could you just explain the difference?
So the London Resilience Forum brings together other responders other than the blue light emergency services. So clearly before that point, the initial part would have been mainly first responders. The London Resilience Forum is wider than just the first responders.
Would the methane message, which would normally be sent at the point at which a major incident is declared, not engage agencies wider than the blue light agencies?
Certainly at that point, not necessarily. It would be very much focused on what the primary objectives are and the resources you've got available. And in a fast-moving complex where people's lives are at risk, then I would expect that it would be focused on those arrangements. We're all absolutely clear as emergency responders what our first duty is, and that's to save people's lives.
Yeah. So do I take it from that at this point you didn't have a multi-agency strategy under the umbrella of the London Resilience Forum? Did that mean that up until that point there was no shared agency strategy outside the blue light or the emergency services?
So I believe that there would be. The purpose of putting in place this is as you're moving into a stage where more and more partners are coming around the table, what you need to be absolutely clear of is, and my role as the chair of the strategic coordinator group is making sure that we're all aligned and we know what our priorities are. That's the purpose of making sure that we have this in place.
At this point, 5 a.m., did you know that the council had already triggered their own emergency response in accordance with their own policy?
Yes, I must have done, because I know that there were local authority representatives at that meeting.
At Lambeth at 5 a.m?
At 5 o'clock.
Who was there?
Can I refer to the...
We can go to your note if you like.
So from the local authority, there was a Stuart Priestley, David Kerry and Mark Sawyer.
Right, just to be clear, can I ask you to look please at MET 00023292? And turn in that document to page 3. This is the 631. I'm so sorry, I've given you the wrong reference. It's MET 00023287. That's the London Resilience SC G minutes for the 5 a.m. meeting.
That's right.
The one I just gave you was the 6:30 a.m. meeting. And if you go to page 3 of that document, you can see the local authority representatives, Stuart Priestley, David Kerry and Mark Sawyer. Were they physically present at Lambeth, or were they patched in by telephone?
I can't remember.
Right.
No, I can't remember.
Right. Was this the first time that you engaged with those individuals or those
Yes.
representatives? Now, going back to a page in the document, you can see item 1.1, LFB requested attendance by a structural engineer due to concerns over the structural integrity of the building. The engineer is now confirmed on the scene. To your knowledge, was that the first time that the LFB had requested attendance, or earlier on in the night?
So that would have come from the London Fire Brigade representative.
Richard Mills.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
So I don't know at what time they made that call.
And then at paragraph 3.1, under the title Situation Brief, you can see it says at 0:55, LFB was called to the incident in North Kensington, a block of flats with 24 floors, Grenfell Tower, West 1. The building is alight from the 2nd to the 24th floor, approximately 100 individuals involved. LFB has declared a major incident. Did anybody say at that meeting that, in fact, the Metropolitan Police had also declared a major incident?
Let me just read down through. No, they did not. But then I was aware that we had, so within my knowledge, I was clearly aware that the police had also declared it a major incident.
And had done so some 35 minutes before the LFB had done?
Yes.
How was this meeting updated with the priorities that were being adopted at that time on the incident ground itself?
So at the end of my note, which I've got as 23289, and page 9 of that,
Yes.
so probably about a third of the way down, it says save life, inform public, welfare of staff. So there will have been a conversation during that 0500 meeting that was not recorded in the minutes around the priorities.
It also says difficulty gaining access 15th floor above, awaiting SIT update. Do you know how long after this meeting you had to wait to get a situational update?
So during the course of that night, there were situational updates coming in incredibly regularly.
Right.
So it wasn't as though you have these periodically every hour and every hour and a half. They would have been coming in pretty instantly.
And going back to the role of the RBKC representatives, Priestley, Kerry and Sawyer, do you know what their duties entailed, or rather what they were actually doing?
So the role of the local authority are there primarily to provide the humanitarian assistance. So that would be opening up casualty and survivor reception centres.
Did anybody at the meeting mention the fact that the London Fire Brigade had asked for plans of the building?
No.
Now, at an earlier meeting in the command unit between DAC O'Loughlin, who was the incident commander at that time, and Inspector Thatcher, who was Silver at that time, and I say time, it was about 2:40, DAC O'Loughlin identifies as the first and biggest thing that the LFB needed from the Metropolitan Police was identifying the people and the casualties. I can show you a clip of the body-worn video if you like, but take it from me that that is what is said. By the time of your involvement and by the time of this first meeting at 5 a.m. of the SCG, did you appreciate the importance of that function, identification of people and casualties, to LFB's search and rescue function?
Yes, so yesterday I described the role of a casualty bureau and taking information from a number of different sources. That includes the hospital, includes the survivor reception centres, so that we have an accurate picture of individuals that may or may not still be within Grenfell Tower.
Now, it took time, I think, for that casualty bureau to be set up, as we heard yesterday. I think some 4 hours.
That's
we were
right.
told it was instructed to be set up at 2:30 and got set up at about 6:30.
That's right.
That period of 4 hours, let me maybe put it to you, was rather long, was it not? If in fact what was supposed to be happening was that the LFB were trying to know who had been cleared from particular flats and who had not.
So whilst the Casualty Bureau is a formal process and a very formal structure in terms of gathering that information in, clearly in the meantime of that taking place, officers on the ground and working with the London Fire Brigade and also with the London Ambulance Service of getting those records of who's come out. That's clearly going to be difficult because there will be individuals who will have self-evacuated and not gone to a recognised centre. The community were absolutely outstanding in helping one another, and clearly bringing that assistance to other human beings who are in peril is one of the things that really does stand out from this absolute tragedy. So there isn't a clean and clinical way of gathering all of that information. It's going to be complex. It's going to be multiple sources, multiple places, just trying to understand who's come out and who may well be remaining in there. And certainly I'm aware that officers and cordons were speaking to people on the cordons to try and get that information through.
What was your understanding of how survivors from the tower were actually being identified?
So it would be my understanding that we would be taking names and addresses from people as we would engage with them.
Right. So what? Your officers would speak to evacuees.
Yes.
And what was the system for doing that? Was there a system for doing that?
So I think it would be, certainly in those circumstances, I think it would be very dealing with it as it happened, as you came across people.
And who was doing that?
So I think that would be a whole host of different officers who were coming in contact with people. I think the priority at that point, though, was clearly people have come out, but also identifying individuals who remain within the tower and seeing what we could do to try and save them.
Yeah. And what did your officers actually do together with the LFB to facilitate that aim?
So I don't know.
Don't know.
In absolute detail.
Right. Now we know that the LELSP major incident manual document provides for survivor reception centres and friends and relatives reception centres to be set up so that survivors can be met by police and other services and enable survivors to be documented and missing persons then to be identified and have information submitted about them. Can I ask you, did you appreciate at the time that the primary responsibility for setting up these centres rested with the police, supported by the local authority?
So My understanding at that point was because the police don't have access to buildings that would enable that to take place, that would be the role of the local authority to do so.
Right. And did you have any discussion with the local authority about how they were going to be setting up those centres?
So I didn't, but I was assured from the 0500 meeting that was in the process. Clearly it says that 2 rest centres were open and a further 3 premises to be opened.
Right, and we picked that up at paragraph 3.8.
Yes.
If we can just go back to it at MET 000023287. Under the rubric under the words shelter and care, including access to medication to be provided for evacuated people, RBKC adult social care arrangements to be developed, 2 rest centres open, further 3 premises to be open to shelter people, likely to consolidate later in the morning. And then you can see the reference to the casualty bureau under 3.10. My question is, what involvement did your officers have in the establishment of those centres?
So specifically, I don't know.
Right. And what involvement did your officers have in going to those centres and assisting evacuated people with identifying themselves and those loved ones who were still in the tower, so as to be able to relay that back to the LFB to assist with their search and rescue?
So again, specifically, again, I don't know precisely the answer to that, but it would be my understanding that our officers would be going there, albeit that recognising that our primary focus is to save life as well.
And do you know what your officer's role was, if any, in overseeing the documentation of the survivors and gathering or providing information in relation to residents who may be still in the tower or who were missing?
No, I do not.
You don't. Commander, thank you very much. I've come to the end of the questions I have for you. I've been going nearly an hour. There may be 1 or 2 more I just want to double check I've covered. Mr. Chairman, this may be appropriate for a break now.
Yes, well, I think we'll have the usual mid-morning break of 10 minutes, that's slightly more. So, Commander, and then when we come back, Commander, we'll have an idea whether there are more questions that we need to ask you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to ask you to go with the usher now, if you would, not to talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room, and we'll resume at 11:10.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good, 11:10 then, please. questions back. All right, Commander. No, I haven't actually asked Mr. Millett, but I suspect he has got some questions for me.
A few, but not very many, Commander. The first is about the call handler handling the advice on CAD 932 at 305, and I know you wanted to see that. I'm not going to show it to you, but I am going to take you back to your witness statement, to paragraph 35, if I can, please. Page 11. Where you've exhibited CAD 482, and you say, this shows that at 3:08 a message was received by the MPS control room from the LFB stating that fire safety guidance had changed and that those inside the building ought to escape by any means possible. My current understanding is that that message was communicated across the airways to officers shortly before 3:10. So to be fair to you, when I asked you about whether or not the call that we see in your exhibit NAJ2 which was timed at 3:05 was inconsistent with the advice that had then changed. Putting the two together, is that right?
That would be my understanding, yes.
Right. So would that mean, and it's your guess is as good as mine, but to be fair to you, would that mean that in fact that particular control room operator at METCC had not yet heard or been given the message that the advice was now to evacuate? Because the first time that was broadcast from METCC to all officers was at 3:08.
Yes, that could well be the case, yes.
But I think it remains the case that you still can't explain why that is so, given that the LFB had changed the advice at 2:47 latest.
That's right, I do not know.
No. Now, just continuing in the same topic, can I take you back, please, to your note of the night at MET 000-23289 at page 8. This is your incident management log, first part. And you say there, and we looked at it earlier, it's a third of the way down the page, everyone onto 999, no waiters. And you told us that that confirmed that the METCC was taking Grenfell calls.
Yes.
Do you know the mechanics of how that would work in terms of BT connecting calls?
I'm sorry, no, that would be a technical question I don't know the answer to.
Do you know whether there are any protocols that the Met has with BT as to how they would put calls through to the Met or through to another control room which was not LFB?
No, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Different question, back to helicopters again. Can I ask you please to go to RBK 000-13294, and within that, please, to go to page 37. This is the LESLP Major Incident Procedure Manual, version 9.4, 2015, paragraph 10.1.3. And you can see there what helicopters can provide by way of the following support facilities. And there's a list of bullet points there, airborne command and control, etc. Would any of those support facilities, in the context of a fire involving the LFB, be available in the absence of a functioning heli-tele downlink?
Could you rephrase that question again for me, please?
Yes. Looking at that list
Yes.
of support facilities that are available when an NPAS helicopter is deployed, would any of those be available in the absence of a heli-tele downlink in the context of a fire?
Yes. So clearly it would provide that evidential video, the capture of the scene. Clearly from a perspective of a helicopter, you wouldn't be able to get that from the ground. The airborne command and control in the immediate aftermath of an incident, that wouldn't be applicable in this particular incident. The overview of the scene, clearly that would give you an additionality from an airborne perspective. The casualty search and assessment of numbers, in my evidence yesterday, I said in my experience that's more around searching of large open spaces, identification of present or potential hazards. Clearly that would give, again, an airborne view of maybe some of those. Transportation of personnel and equipment, that wouldn't be appropriate in these circumstances. Weather conditions and wind direction at sea, that would clearly be available by other means, but it would give the degree of drift of the burning material that's falling from the building, and whether the emergency services on the scene would need to extend the cordon at all. The area containment, including cordon deployment infringement, you would get that from officers on the ground as well. However, it does give you that wider perspective. And the traffic management, route planning, clearly one of the primary roles for us in supporting the London Fire Brigade is allowing not just them but other emergency vehicles access to and fro of the scene. So that would give you that perspective that you may not necessarily quite get from the ground itself. And then imagery of the scene, including photographs and video, thermal imaging, that would give you a different perspective of that.
Just following up on that in relation to the third, fourth and fifth bullet points, so immediate overview of the scene, etc., casualty search, stroke assessment of numbers, and identification of present or potential hazards. Let me suggest to you that it must be right, mustn't it, that in the absence of a heli-tele downlink between the NPAS helicopter and the LFB command unit, the support facilities offered by the helicopter in relation to those functions would be very severely limited.
So the operators within the helicopter are incredibly experienced, and what they would be able to do is convey that verbally to those on the ground. It wouldn't necessarily rely entirely upon a heli-tele downlink. So they would be providing their own assessment, clearly.
They would. But yes, without the visual, I repeat the question, the LFB's ability to gain support from the facility would be very severely limited. No?
I wouldn't say severely limited. I mean, clearly it would be of benefit, absolutely it would. But also of benefit is the fact that the operators within the helicopter would be talking to those on the ground as well and describing what they are seeing and the hazards.
Can I ask you to then go back in this document, slightly different topic, back in this document to page 11. So we're still within the LESLP Major Incident Procedure Manual. And at page 11, where we're dealing with the local authority, you can see that there's reference under 382 to local authority gold and the LLACC, and under 3.9 the local authority liaison officer, LALO, and the LALO is the senior representative of the affected borough who is able to react to requests for local authority assistance and is the on-scene liaison point for the council, and you can see what the LALO is required to do. Although we don't see reference to it in the LESLP itself, would you expect the LALO's role to include the provision of plans of the building in an incident such as this?
So if they had that within, clearly if it's a council building or a building which the council would have access, then I would expect that to be the case, yes.
Would you expect the LALO to be able to provide a list of residents?
Yes, I would.
Would you expect the LALO to be able to identify vulnerable residents, such as those who were partially sighted or non-sighted, or those with mobility difficulties?
Certainly vulnerabilities, yes.
Commander, thank you very much. I've come to the end of my... Apparently not. Sorry. Can you just wait one moment? I'm sorry. I'm asked to ask you, as you can see from what's just happened, is could the helicopter have used the public address system? I mean, could a helicopter have used a public address system such as a megaphone or some other kind of way of communicating with residents?
So it does have access to that. Whether that would have been heard or not, I don't know. So I don't know specifically the answer to that question.
And what is that access? How does it work functionally? Do you know?
No, I'm sorry.
No. Thank you very much, Commander. I have no further questions for you. Commander, thank you very much. I have no further questions. Can I say thank you very much to you for coming along and assisting the inquiry with our investigations? We very much appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to add my thanks, Commander. I'm sorry that we've had to call you back for a second day, and thank you for coming back for the second day. Your evidence is very helpful. It's another piece in the jigsaw puzzle which we're trying to put together. So we're very grateful to you for coming along to tell us what you could.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now you're free to go. If you'd like to go to the usher,
Thank you.
she'll look after you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to the next oral witness to come is Mr. Woodrow from the London Ambulance Service.
Yes.
And Miss Rose Grogan will be examining him.
Good.
And we'll probably take a short break in order for him to be brought to rearrange matters for that. Before I do that, can I just read into the record a number of further pieces of evidence?
Yes, very well.
I want to read into the record 2 schedules of witness statements, exhibits and documents. The first of those contains a list of witness statements and exhibits of other police officers who attended the scene on the night, and also temporary Chief Inspector Winch, who describes how the emergency calls and the Metropolitan Police Command and Control System operates. The reference to temporary Chief Inspector Winch's statement is INQ quintuple 0519, and that's the schedule. And if it can please be put up on the screen so people can see what I'm talking about, that would be helpful. INQ 000519. And all of those references are the references to those witness statements which are being read in. Inspector Winch, Chief Inspector Winch's statement is METS 00020664. There's a second list of documents, which is INQ quintuple 0515. If that could also please be shown on the screen. And when it comes up, I'll explain what it is. That is a list of helicopter and NPAS witness statements with the name of the witness statement maker, as in the other schedule, the exhibit numbers where relevant, and the Met references. Now, I should just add this. The material contained in both schedules, that's 519 and 515, does include distressing information about matters on the night, and the NPAS material also includes live footage from the NPAS helicopter, which is distressing and graphic. And so if anybody wants to access it, then I would just say that if they do so, they need to be mindful of any distress that may be caused by this material, either to themselves or to anybody who is looking at it with them.
Good. Well, thank you for drawing attention to that.
So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I would ask for another short break so that the preparations can be made before the next witness comes.
Very well. Well, I'll rise for 5 minutes or less if you find that you're ready sooner.
Very good. Well, it's Miss Grogan who's going to be taking the next
you
witness.
in general.
Me plural, right.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Grogan.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The next witness for today is Mr. Paul Woodrow from the London Ambulance Service.
Good, thank you.
Can we please call Mr. Woodrow?
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
should be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woodrow. Would you like to take a seat and make yourself comfortable? All right. Yes, Ms. Grogan.
Thank you. Can you please give the inquiry your full name?
My full name is Paul Andrew Woodrow.
Thank you very much for coming to give evidence today and to assist the inquiry with its investigations. It's very much appreciated. I'll be asking you the questions today. If you have any difficulty in understanding any questions, please feel free to ask me to rephrase or to go slower. And if you feel you need a break at any point, then just signal and we'll have a short break.
Okay.
And please keep your voice up and speak into the microphone so that the transcribers can hear you as well.
All right.
Okay. You've made a witness statement for the inquiry. It's in a folder on your desk in front of you, and it will also appear on the screen, so it may be easier to look at documents on the screen than in the bundle. Can I start by taking you to that statement? It's LAS 7 zeros and then number 9. It's dated June 2018. Have you read your statement recently?
Yes, I have.
Can you confirm that the contents are true?
Yes, I can.
And have you discussed your evidence with anyone?
No.
Can I just, Mr. Woodrow, to save you the trouble of getting too close to the microphone, I think you'll find that you're about the right distance at the moment.
Thank you, sir.
If you're not, someone will wave at me and we'll tell you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks.
I'll stop leaning forward as well, I think. You've also provided exhibits. A list of those exhibits is at LAS 6 zeros number 10. If we could get that up on the screen, please. And the references, just for the record, for those exhibits are LAS 702 to LAS 708.
Mm-hmm.
Going first to your statement then, Mr. Woodrow, on page 3, could you look at paragraph 2.2? So 2.1 and 2.2. In 2.2, you say that you've drawn on information and documents generated and held by the LAS in preparing this statement. Can I just check what those are? So did that, at the time you wrote your statement, include witness statements taken by the police and subsequently disclosed by the inquiry?
No, the information that I used in terms of crafting my statement at the time were obviously the policies and procedures that we have internally. I reviewed our computer-aided dispatch logs, the instant logs that were completed by operational commanders. I did not actually have access to any of the MPS witness statements when I crafted the statement that was submitted.
Have you reviewed those now?
I have reviewed those statements now.
Thank you. And again, just for the record, the LAS gold log reference is MET 30-23715. The LAS CAD reference is MET 30-19931. Did you also review the 999 call transcripts?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. You say at paragraph 2.1 of your statement that you've worked for the LAS for 27 years and have been a senior operational manager for the last 15 years. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you are currently Director of Operations at the London Ambulance Service NHS Trust.
Yes, I am.
You say your role includes line management of all frontline services. Does that include HART, that's the Hazardous Area Response Team?
Yes, it does.
And the Air Ambulance?
So the London Air Ambulance is a separate entity, but the London Ambulance Service provide the flight paramedics for that service, and we also provide the dispatch facility within our emergency operations centre.
You also say there that you're responsible for 999 emergency operations centres. Does that include 999 call handlers?
It does indeed.
So you have ultimate oversight of call handlers at the LAS?
That's the emergency operations centres are one of the functional lines within my directorate, yes.
In your role, are you personally required to carry out any frontline activities such as attending a scene of an incident?
So within my particular role now, I'm not routinely deployed as part of the command structures, but depending on the certain types of incident, there may be a role where I will be deployed as part of that structure, as indeed I was on the night in question.
Would you be deployed to scene for all major incidents, or would it depend on the incident?
No, I wouldn't.
And when you are deployed as part of a major incident, what would your role usually be?
Well, now my role would usually be to be a spokesman for the service, to work in terms of multi-service media, that kind of thing. I wouldn't routinely be deployed to manage an incident. We have a structure in place that does that routinely. I wouldn't be routinely required to do that.
So the inquiry's already heard about gold, silver and bronze command. Do you sit slightly apart from that command structure?
I do.
And what experience do you have of attending major incidents in recent years?
So I've had quite a long career, and my career started initially as a clinician. So I qualified as a paramedic, so I attended a number of major incidents, essentially IRA related terrorist, so I attended some of IRA bombings. As I moved forward and qualified as a paramedic and then went into management, I attended the 7/7 suicide bombings in London, and I was the ambulance incident commander at Russell Square. And so I've had a varied range of experience of major incidents throughout my career.
Do you have ultimate responsibility for training of the people within your directorate as well as for operations?
So overall accountability for the delivery of training, yes.
Thank you. I'll move on now to ask you some questions about your role on the night of the fire. When were you first alerted to the fire at Grenfell Tower?
Well, as I said, I wasn't structured on call that night, so I wasn't the nominated officer on call. We had a gold on call. I, in the nature of my role, like to have my telephone with me at all times. And I wasn't directly contacted, but I woke up and looked at my phone and looked at my inbox and saw that a pager message had gone out relating to this incident. I then woke up, contacted the Gold Strategic Commander that I knew was on duty that night, which was Stuart Crichton. I asked Stuart Crichton to give me a verbal update on the telephone, and the verbal update was essentially that we'd got the structures in place, our Gold command suite was open, and that the incident was being managed in accordance to our policies and procedures. I asked if there was any specific assistance he required at that time, and he was confident that the incident was being managed in accordance to our procedures.
So LAS procedures don't require you to be notified or to attend, but you decided to phone in?
Yeah, so my role as Executive Director of Operations, there's no direct requirement. I can be paged to certain types of incidents, and the Gold commanders can choose to contact me as the Director of Operations if they feel they need something specific from me. And that is normally for me to manage the wider NHS to allow the Gold commander to concentrate on the strategic command of the incident. So I'm usually used as trying to manage our executive, our board, and the wider NHS in terms of the provision of information.
And you did decide to go in that morning to the EOC at Waterloo, and you arrived at about 6 a.m, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Were you briefed about the incident at that stage?
I was.
What was the content of that briefing?
That there'd obviously been a major fire with most of the building actually alight, large numbers of patients trapped in the building. There was a difficulty around trying to identify finite numbers. I was given an update on the casualties that we'd treated so far, and the key thing for me at that point was to ensure that we were getting that accurate information, because our NHS partners would require that. So it was just ensuring that essentially we had the resources. The next thing was around the management of shift changeover. So, were we thinking about the crews that had been on the night shift and the fact that we needed to turn those crews round with days. So it was really just a situational report and an update in terms of, and then I allowed Gold just to continue his normal business working through the recognised structures that he had in place.
You then left to travel to the tower at about 6:45 that morning. When you arrived at the tower, what was your role?
So essentially I'd been nominated by the strategic commander because of the scale of the incident to be the media spokesman. There was a lot of information coming back around, large amounts of media congregating at the scene, and it's often the case that when there is a major incident that we do nominate a senior operational officer, and indeed it's in our incident response plan that a senior designated officer is sent to the scene to manage the press briefings. So that was primarily the role that I undertook when I went to Grenfell Tower that day.
Given the time that you arrived at the tower, can we take it that you're familiar with the external layout of the Grenfell Tower and where the LAS set up Sector 1 and Sector 2?
Yes, very much so.
If we could pull up MET 3019059 onto the screen, that's a map produced by the Incident Response Officer Lawrence Ayonu, the bronze medic, as part of his evidence. Does that map reflect what you understand to be the layout of the scene on the night?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to move on and ask you some questions about the role of the LAS in a major incident and your policies and procedures. You've exhibited some policies to your witness statement. That's the LESLP Major Incident Procedure Manual, the GESIP Joint Doctrine Interoperability Framework, and LAS's Incident Response Procedures. Not exhibited but relevant is the Strategic Coordination Protocol, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And you are familiar with that document?
I am.
So the starting point is that there's a legal duty under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004 for the LAS to assess risk, to plan for emergencies, and cooperate and share information with other responders.
Correct.
And you are familiar with that legal obligation?
I am.
Both LESLIP, as I call it, is that what you call it?
LESLIP, yes.
Yeah. Both LESLIP and GESIP deal with coordination between agencies, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And the Strategic Coordination Protocol also deals with joint working.
Correct.
Before we look at the policies, can I just check the agencies that would be working together on the night of Grenfell? So that would be the LAS, obviously, the LFB, the police, and the local authority. Is that right?
Yes, they would be the primary people that would be working together. There would be supplementary organisations, so utilities can come into that equation on the night, but the primary partners in the incident are the three emergency services and local authority, but that doesn't exclude, depending on the circumstances of the incident, other participants.
What expectations would the LAS have of a local authority at a major incident such as Grenfell?
So I think each service has different expectations. For us, in terms of our role within a major incident, is obviously to deal with the immediacy of treating patients, ensuring that they're triaged, that they're treated, and that they're transported to suitable centres for definitive care. I think where we look to the local authority is to set up, where people have been displaced, survival reception centres for people that are what we would describe as P3 patients, that patients that are up and walking and don't have an immediate need to be transported to hospital, having reception centres where they can have shelter. So that's the primary concern for us in the first stages of a major incident, that we would look to the local authority to facilitate.
If we could pull up LESLIP now, that's LAS 705 at page 13. So this is section 4 of LESLIP, which you refer to in your statement. It contains guidance and the key principles for effective multi-agency working. It advises that agencies should meet at the scene face-to-face, that's 4.1.1, share information with partners promptly, establish a joint emergency airwave channel, and also understand key priorities, activities, and issues of partner agencies. Let's go through each of these in turn. First of all, meeting at the scene. Who would the LAS expect to liaise with at an incident like Grenfell Tower when they arrived?
So we would look for the fire service, London Fire Brigade Command. So in that type of incident, we would look to liaise with the operational commander from the London Fire Brigade.
And how quickly would you expect the relevant supervising officers to meet with one another?
Well, in ideal circumstances, the 3 emergency services should actually have their sort of control command units co-located, and therefore and very distinguished in terms of there are individual beacons that flash from command units that make it visible. So we would normally expect to see that in terms of that is the ideal place where you get the 3 services jointly located.
So if you have a first responder from the LAS attending the scene, would you expect them to go straight to the LFB command unit?
So the first responder on scene, the first thing that we would do is expect them to give us a report back in terms of what is going on. So we wouldn't expect the first responder to, for example, to stop and treat patients. What we want that first responder is to get eyes onto the incident, try and feed information back to the emergency operations centre or the special operations centre, depending on whether the incident has been declared a significant incident or a major incident. We would expect them to do that and then look for the person in charge, commander in charge.
So it would be the second thing you'd expect them to do when they arrived?
Yeah.
And what information would you expect to be shared at that first meeting between an LAS responder and the LFB command?
So we so there's 2 things that we train our staff. So I think it's important to say that apart from the training that we give our staff a set of action cards which they're obliged to carry at all times on duty. That essentially sets out the whole set of actions that we expect, including the roles at major incidents, what the duties for those particular roles are. So that allows people, even if they're unfamiliar with a certain type of role, actually it's a checklist that says these are the duties you need to discharge in that role. We would expect the information back would be, for us it's I think you've seen reference to something called methane, which is essentially the first report that we would expect someone to give from an incident site. So that is whether it's a major incident or we have within our operating procedures we have declaration of a significant incident, which I can talk about if required. So whether it's a significant or a major incident, the exact location, the type of incident that we've got, potential hazards, access and egress to the incident, number of casualties, so and the emergency services, other emergency services that are on scene. So it's a very quick situational report that tries to give us a flavour in terms of the emergency operations centre and the command teams around what type of incident we're facing.
I'll come back and ask you questions later about what happened on the night.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to establish the principles here, but thank you. The next thing in LESIP is to share information promptly. What methods of communication are in place between the LAS and the LFB?
So routinely, then we will have interactions with the LFB control room.
And how are those effected?
So they are by phone. So we have an electronic CAD, computer-aided dispatch link, which is with the Metropolitan Police. We don't have that with the London Fire Brigade, but so we use a standard telephone procedure both ways. We have airwave radios, so both the London Fire Brigade, well, all the emergency services have airwave digital radio technology. There is a emergency services tri-agency channel, emergency service 3 channel, which is always in operation and is monitored, and critical information can be shared across that channel. So there's numerous ways, and then obviously when we're on scene, face-to-face communication in terms of the information flow coming from our control room and vice versa.
The shared radio, is that monitored on scene as well as in the control room?
So, no, for us, Emergency Service 3 channel is monitored in our control room on the incident management desk, and in course of a significant incident or a major incident being declared, we move that incident into a specialist operations centre. That channel would be critically monitored during that period.
You mentioned that the LAS has a link with the MPS CAD. We've heard evidence about how you can update the other's CAD. Is that right? How does that work in practice?
With the Metropolitan Police
Yes.
Service? So, yes, we have the ability to electronically transfer messages directly into each other's CAD. So without the need for them to physically contact us, they're just typing messages. So it's actually an electronic link. So they can provide update information electronically to us.
And can you see their CAD, or can you only pass messages straight to
No,
their
we
CAD?
don't actually see their CAD. It's just the messages that they're sending us, and that goes into our log as a message received from the MPS with whatever information they're giving us. We don't see their live CAD.
And they don't see yours
No.
either? Thank you. Is it right that command vehicles are equipped with airwave radio as well?
That is correct.
And so a command unit on scene, you would also expect to be listening in to that Joint Emergency Services channel?
Yes.
The next, moving on in LESIP, the next heading is to understand key priorities. You would expect this to happen on scene, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Are there other ways of sharing this information, for example, at silver or gold command level?
So in the first stages of an incident, you primarily be getting that information from the scene, from the actual operational commanders on the ground. As the incident gets more established, if there's a decision to create a strategic coordination group, then you might get that information being shared at different levels. But certainly at the beginning of an incident, that information will be coming from people on the ground.
And is that when you start to have interagency gold meetings, for example?
Well, so on scene, you would be having operational command meetings. So the 3 services would be meeting together, talking about the operational challenges, the latest situation reports, exchanging that information. That information would then come back up through to our specialist operations centre, and where our tactical commander would be based, and that tactical commander then would take anything he or she felt was required to the gold meetings.
What procedures are in place then for communicating information learned from other agencies at the scene back to control and more widely through the LAS? Is that by radio? Is that by phone? Or CAD?
So it would principally go by radio. Yeah, if information needs to be disseminated, it would go through airwave radio.
And is the same procedure then in place for communicating information learned at command level back to the scene? So would you have the control room radioing LAS officers at the scene?
Yes, so our emergent, well, it would be our specialist operations centre. Absolutely has dedicated radio channels for not only the resources that are being sent, but also for the commanders. They're on a separate radio channel. So yes, we have that two-way information flow.
Could we pull up LAS 70s and then the number 1, please? And we're looking for it, that's page 6. So this is GESIP, which also emphasises effective communication. If we flip forward onto page 10 of the same document, section 6 of GESIP talks about control rooms, and it says that the control rooms play a vital role in managing the early stages of a multi-agency incident. There cannot be a coordinated multi-agency response or effective communication if control rooms do not deliver a swift and joint approach to handling them. It also says a bit further down that a dialogue between control room supervisors should be established as soon as possible. Within the LAS, what role or rank is the control room supervisor? Is that a bronze or a silver? Or is it something entirely different?
No, it would be something entirely different. So it would normally, as I've said, when we have a significant incident or a major incident declared, that the learning that we've gained from previous major incidents is that rather than trying to manage that within the main emergency operations centre along with all the other business as usual calls that are coming into our control room, we moved the incident out into a specialist operations centre. Each shift, there are nominated roles which are allocated to the watch that are on duty, and that will include critical logists, watch managers, dispatchers, and at the beginning of each shift, those people are nominated. And so it would be a member of control room staff that would work under the SOC manager, who would be a bronze level manager.
And I think you said the trigger for that is a significant incident.
Significant or major.
Significant or major. We go on to page 11 of the same document, please. Now it says there at little b that one of the things you should do is nominate a single point of contact in each control room to establish a method of communication between the different agencies, which could involve creating a telecommunications link or a multi-agency interoperable talk group. Do you know if that was done on the night of the 14th?
So the multi-agency interoperable talk group, which is a channel that I refer to as Emergency Service 3, was in operation because, detailed in my statement, I do note that there are the Special Operations Centre pick up messages that are coming through on ES3. So that channel was live, and indeed that is live 24/7.
Was there a single point of contact? So was there one person in charge?
I could not definitively define if there was a single point of contact on that night.
And would you be able to say whether there was a single point of contact within the MPS or the LFB that you were liaising with?
No, I couldn't say that, no.
We move on now to the LAS's own procedures, again staying with the theme of communications. That's LAS 70s and then the number 8, page 79. Could we actually have page 80, please? Sorry, that's an error in my referencing. And under 4.6.11, it says robust communication links must be established as soon as possible. That would be via the links that we've discussed, so Airwave, 999 calls, and the CAD. Is that right?
That's correct.
And finally, to complete the picture, we have the Strategic Coordination Protocol. So that's MET 30-23288 at page 18. And this at 2.5 refers to core function 5 of creating and maintaining shared situational awareness. So that would be through effective communication between agencies, wouldn't it?
Would you like Mr. Woodrow to read that? Because I
Yes,
think he's
sorry,
having
I
the same problem that I've
went
had.
a little bit too fast
It's a bit-
there.
Oh, there we are. Hope that's better.
Yes.
So it's fair to summarise the policies in this way. Responding agencies should be in regular communication with one another. Do you agree?
That's correct.
Yep. Both at the scene and then at a tactical and strategic level.
Correct.
Responding agencies should have access to key information about the incident.
When it's available, yes.
And they should also have an understanding of the other's activities during the incident.
Correct.
Thank you. During the course of a major fire, what kind of information would you expect to be shared between the LFB, the MPS, and the LAS? You can just give us the key headlines.
Okay, actually, from the fire brigade, we would expect the fire brigade to be leading agency for this type of incident. How much of the building is affected? Do we know how many properties are within the building? Do we have any idea of casualty numbers? Do we know any idea of patients that have self-evacuated or have been rescued? From the police, our initial expectation from the police would probably be to manage the scene in terms of the coordination of cordons, ensuring that the scene site is safe. So they would be the principal things that we'd look for in the first instance on arrival.
Going back to the LFB, would you expect them to share details of their tactics and the way in which they were intending to fight the fire or to evacuate or not evacuate residents?
Yes, we would.
And what is the LAS's experience of the reliability of LFB communication equipment prior to the fire?
Well, the LFB use two different types of communication. So the LFB have a UHF radio system which enables LFB commanders and firefighters to exchange information. We use our airwave radios for all of it. So they have different types of radio communication where we have sole use of airwave and we just provide different radio channels to split resources depending on what type of incident it is. I suppose in reality, the actual amount of times that we work together as two agencies in a year, if you take the London Ambulance Service, takes around 1.9 million emergency calls. 1%, less than 1% of those calls are actually calls to fire-related issues from the London Fire Brigade. So our interaction on a day-to-day basis is quite small compared to, for example, our working with the MPS. What you would expect at incidents where we are required to work together is that we all work together to establish the JESOP. So JESOP was designed to ensure that the three emergency services work more cohesively together. So we would expect that to happen. Now, clearly, there are challenges. There are challenges with every plan. That when you try to enact that plan, there are always sets of circumstances which create challenge. But I wouldn't say, from my experience, that we've had overarching problems with communication with the London Fire Brigade. We work closely with them, and indeed we exercise regularly with them.
Going back to your statement and moving on now to talking about the events of the night.
Yeah.
If we pull up your statement at page 6, so that's LAS 70 number 9.
Yeah.
You've provided a chronology for the inquiry that sets out key events on the night from the LAS's perspective. Starting at 01:29, that's when the first 999 call was connected to the LAS, and that was actually from the LFB, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And I think you've explained that it is usual practice for the LFB to phone you rather than use any other form of communication
Correct.
to alert you. And they do that by way of a 999 call, do they?
They do.
This call was placed about 30 minutes after we now know that the LFB attended the scene. Is it normal for that amount of time to pass before the LFB contacts the LAS?
No, I think we would reasonably expect to be contacted sooner than that.
We can now look at the transcript of that call, which is INQ 50378. That'll just be on the screen rather than in your bundle. And if we could have page 2, please. So that's the start of the call where the operator answers and the London Fire Brigade identify themselves. If we could move on to page 3, you'll see there's some explanation of the location of the event, which I'll come back to. And just at the bottom of the page, the caller tells the LAS operator that they've got a 20-pump fire.
Yeah.
And then on page 4, you'll see just below the middle of the page, the operator says, yeah, bear with me, mate. So you've got a 20-pump fire, persons supporting, but I think that's a mistranscription of persons reported. Caller says he said 25-pump fire now, and the operator confirms 25-pump fire. So during the course of this short call, the LFB attendance goes up from a 20-pump fire to a 25-pump fire.
Yeah.
Would an LAS call handler understand the significance of a 20-pump fire when answering a call?
Not just based on 20-pump fire. The persons reported is the bit that is important for us. So I think what's important, I suppose, to point out is that the London Fire Brigade do respond to fire incidents in London with large amounts of appliances to, industrial units overnight. So we are not. It's not uncommon for the LFB to call us to say that they're dispatching a large amount of appliances, or it's a large pump fire. The important things for us is around persons involved. But although the call handler is taking this call, I think what we can draw, or what I certainly drew from reviewing, is actually this type of message that we get for the LFB warranted further action before too long.
And when the dispatcher then decides to dispatch LAS resources to the scene, is it just the information in the 999 call that they take into account?
Yes.
And as you said, the significant thing in that call is that persons were reported.
Yes.
Based on your review of this call and the information contained within it, would you have expected the LAS to declare a significant incident at this point?
So not directly from this one call. I think, I mean, this call came in at 1:29:06, and from recollection, the Emergency Operations Centre, so this would have been a call that was coming into one call handler. Once that was identified by the watch managers, then very quickly, just based on the intelligence from this call, it was the Emergency Operations Centre that declared as significant. So we didn't wait for anyone to arrive on scene. EOC declared it a significant incident, and there were a number of actions as a consequence of that taken.
Your statement says that the call was triaged through Protocol 8.
Yeah.
Those protocols are used to triage individual patients, is that right?
Yeah, so we have, I guess it's important to be clear about how we triage. So every ambulance service in England has one of two triage systems that are licensed to be used in England. One of those is NHS Pathways, and one of those is a medical priority dispatch system. The London Ambulance Service uses that triage tool. What that triage tool essentially does is our call handlers are non-clinical. So they take information from the 999 caller, and that will guide them, based on that information, will guide them into a set of questions that need to be asked and responded to with yes and no answers. And then there are some specific questions as you get through. The idea is to work through what priority of response, based on the information that's being taken from the caller, do we need to allocate in terms of dispatching a resource.
Do the protocols assume that the person on the other end of the phone is either a patient or is reporting a patient?
Or could be a third party caller that is passing information. Yes, so we have to go on the information that we receive from the call.
So are there any more general protocols where you're being called to an incident rather than where there's one individual patient?
Well, so what we will get is something that we call a chief complaint. So the chief complaint will be if someone's saying difficulty in breathing, then that will take them to the protocol for difficulty in breathing, and within that chief complaint there will be a number of questions that get asked. Based on the answers to those questions, it will lead to different questions, and ultimately at the end of the protocol it will deem a response requirement in terms of the priority of that patient and the length of time that we have to respond to that. So it's quite a complex system. It allocates chief complaint, and then once we've got the chief complaint, based on what the information is being given to the call handler, that then through the computer-aided dispatch leads them to a set of questions to eliminate some conditions and ask further questions. And ultimately when that protocol is concluded, the determinant is reached and the response is allocated.
Does the protocol tell you how many resources to dispatch, or is there an element of discretion involved there?
Yeah, so there is an element of discretion involved.
You say that the incident was classed as a category C2 call.
Yes.
What is C2?
Not immediately life-threatening, and would require a response within 30 minutes. That was the initial triage of that call. I think that's in relation to the fact that there are no patient details received. So at the time, the information was that there was a fire-related incident where there were people reported as being involved in that, but there was no direct clinical information regarding to patient. And essentially, the triage system, when you get patient-specific information, so if there had been someone with severe difficulty in breathing that was confirmed, clearly that call to that patient would have been a higher priority. But this was a generic call with persons reported, and it generates a subset or a standardised priority, which was a C2.
And then it goes to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher decides which resources to send to the incident. Is that
Correct.
right? On page 9 of the transcript, so that's the document that's on the screen now, but page 9, you'll see at the end the caller, so this is actually the LAS calling, I think, gives a reference of 247, which is to the LAS CAD. Do you know why they would do that with the LFB?
Yeah, so that is just confirming to the London Fire Brigade what we would call our working CAD, which is the information that we've just received from the LFB. It's essentially reading back our reference.
And why do they do that when the LFB can't see the LAS's CAD?
Sorry.
Why do they do that when the LFB does not have access to the LAS's CAD?
Because if they want to pass us any further information in subsequent calls, they can then turn around and say, in relation to the LAS CAD 247, which then we could automatically link to the original call. So that's the reason why we give that reference.
So going back to your statement and moving on a bit in the chronology, so that's back to LAS 709 at page 6. We see at 1:33, wait for it to come up on screen, 1:33, the first IRO is dispatched to the scene. And then in the next 5 minutes, I've counted up that the LAS dispatches two further ambulances, the London Air ambulance, 4 heart operatives, you can just see that at the bottom of the page, and 1 further incident response officer. Do you know the basis upon which the dispatcher decided to send that level of resources to the tower?
So it would be, incident response officers we have on duty 24/7 right across London. It is standardised procedure for us that when we receive a call from the London Fire Brigade to a fire with persons reported, that an incident response officer is sent. In terms of the ambulance and the hazardous area response team, again, for an incident of this type, our hazardous area response team would automatically be dispatched to what we would call a fire call.
Just pausing there, does the reference to 4 heart mean 4 teams or just 4 individuals?
4 resources.
And a resource is 1 person?
No, we've got two. We've got 4 vehicles, they have different levels. So we sent a heart responder who was solo in a car. We sent 2 in another vehicle. So we have 2 teams on duty, heart teams, 24/7 in London, 1 based in West London, 1 based in East London. That's a national asset, and we have to have those 12 heart, 2 teams of 6. We have to have those on duty 24/7.
And they just attend by car, do they?
And bigger vehicles. So they are a team. So we will, for example, in some types of call, we might send a heart operative to go and provide a situational report, which means we wouldn't send the whole heart team. We'd hold some back. So they just have different methods of responding. But essentially, they work in 2 teams of 6 in different vehicles.
Okay.
So we've been taking breaks about every hour over the last 2 days. I'm very happy myself to push on to lunchtime if you like.
Well, let's see. How
we
are you
check with the
feeling, Mr.
witness.
Woodrow? Do you...
I'm comfortable. If that's, yeah.
Well, we'll press on. If you get to the stage when you think you've had enough for the time being, just make it clear and then we'll stop.
Thank you, sir.
Moving on in the chronology then, on page 7 of your witness statement at 041, right at the bottom there, if we could blow up the last entry on the screen. That is when CAD 247, so this incident, was declared a significant incident by the EOC. And we can see that on the CAD, so that's MET 000199931 at page 3. and it's about 2/3 of the way down. It says,
Well, I think we have to have it expanded before we
hang on,
try and look at it.
I think it says call made significant incident due to intel. There it is. So it's 014142 by K. Ranmi. Can you see that, Mr. Woodrow?
I can.
Yep. Call made a significant incident due to intel on instruction of ACDL. Is ACDL a person?
Yes, so AC, I do apologise because the London Ambulance Service is full of acronyms. AC will be area controller. And an area controller is within our emergency operations centre. We have dispatch groups for certain parts of geography in London. So we have southwest London, southeast London, northeast, north central, northwest London. Within those dispatch groups, there are controllers that are controlling resources that are available in those sectors. Overseeing those sectors is an area controller, so that is someone in our emergency operations centre. And I believe, looking at that document, that would have been area controller David Laird on the evening in question.
And he's a relatively senior person within the EOC.
Yeah.
You say in your statement that this decision was made because of the nature of 999 calls and information that had been reported. Was that the information from the LFB?
So I think it was obviously the information that originally came from the LFB in terms of the number of pumps that they were deploying. There were a subsequent call, and I think it was just the area controller putting that intelligence together very quickly and saying this is something that is not routine, and declaring that quickly.
So we can see in your chronology, we don't need to pull it up, but by that stage you'd had 4 999 calls relating to the scene, although they weren't from inside the tower, they were from members of the public outside. The definition of a significant incident is in the LAS incident manuals. That's LAS 708 at page 20. Again, sorry, my references on this document seem to be out by a page. If you could go on to page 21, please. So there's the LAS definition of a significant incident. And it says there that if persons reported fire calls 6 to 10 pumps and above or large-scale evacuation. By this stage, this was a 25-pump fire. We learned that from the 999 call. Based on that information, should it not have been declared a major incident rather than a significant incident?
No, I don't believe at that time that it should have been. We were receiving information of a building fire. This is quite difficult around. In some aspects, this is why we've created, through learning, the declaration of a significant incident, because there are times where the LFB will attend, for example, an industrial fire where there are no persons involved at all, and there are a large amount of pumps dispatched to that incident. But that would not be deemed as a major incident for us. So some of the learning was that in the initial stages, if you think there is potential for an incident to escalate, we've now created within the incident response plan something called a significant incident, which essentially changes the way that we're dealing with that incident up until the point that we can actually get better intelligence from the scene. But things that a declaration of a significant incident do is, for example, to take that incident out of our emergency operations centre put it into the Special Operations Centre. We send more resource than we would normally do to a routine incident. So we start to enhance that response at an early stage by defining it as a significant incident.
Was the LAS aware at this time that the police had already declared a major incident at 1:32?
No, we were not.
Is that the sort of key information that you would expect the MPS to have told the LAS when they made their decision?
So we would have expected that information to have been conveyed to us, yes.
And was the shared airwave channel 3 up and running at this point?
It would have been,
So that's a route by which they could have communicated it to you?
yes.
And would having that information about the MPS's decision have made a difference to the LAS's decision?
Depending on the information that the Metropolitan Police Service would have passed with that message, because it is possible for our individual services to declare what they deem to be a major incident for their individual organisation. But for us as a Category 1 responder, and principally our role within a major incident is the treatment, the triage and treatment of patients. It's not always the case that if the Metropolitan Police Service declare a major incident that we would deem it to be such an incident from a health perspective. So I think it sounds as if I'm not being clear on the question. I think major incident declaration is certainly an important thing, but what we would have looked for was the reason. So we would have expected when a major incident is declared, and all of the doctrine refer to this, what you expect the person that is declaring a major incident is to give you that methane report, which is very high level, but it describes what the reasons for the declaration. I think based on that information, that could have well influenced the decision, but of course we didn't receive that information.
Moving on again in the chronology, the first LAS resource on scene arrived at 1:45, and that was wide 251. This is on page 8 of your statement.
Yes.
That was a heart officer, and shortly afterwards an advanced paramedic arrives on scene, and then the first incident response officer, Lawrence Ionu, says he arrived at 1:49.
Yeah.
So that's a 12-minute response time between first dispatch and arrival. Is that a reasonable time in your experience?
Yes.
When deciding who to dispatch to the scene, would the LAS dispatcher look to see who was closest?
So we have, in terms of officers, yes, they're dispatched differently. In terms of the actual ambulance resource, our ambulance resource is tracked, is on electronic tracking, and so the allocators for resource would press a suggestion button, and what the CAD system does is take the GPS coordinates of where the call is, and then does a scan round and gives the allocator or the dispatcher the list of the nearest resources. So, yes.
And how would you expect those different LAS personnel arriving on scene to liaise with one another?
So I think obviously the first officer on scene, they would essentially assume the role of operational commander, and they would then look, well, the first thing they would do is report back and give a report back into our emergency operations centre. They would then look to put, depending on what they'd seen, the relevant structures in place to manage that. So allocating primary command roles, they would be looking in terms of suitable access and egress points for resources, so setting up a rendezvous point. They would do that very quickly in the first few minutes of arriving. Then what they would look to do is to find out where the other emergency services in terms of their command and try to get further information.
Would the other LAS personnel, such as paramedics and heart officers, know in advance that Lawrence Iono had assumed the role of bronze medic?
So they wouldn't. They wouldn't know the name of the individual, but they would obviously, the fact that we've got bronze medic would be given instructions back to EOC in terms of, can you tell ambulances where the rendezvous point is, and that information. In our ambulance vehicles, we have mobile data terminals, so there's just a lot of data gets transferred onto a screen. That information would be updated through to crews based on the information that's coming back from the scene and requests for rendezvous points and directions on where crews are to head to.
But Heart don't have access to MDTs, is that right, in their vehicles?
So Heart on that particular night, so the vehicles that Heart were in were not MDT vehicles. They had satellite navigation. But what we have on airwave radios is the ability to pass information in terms of messages down on their airwave radio in text message as well as voice.
And do people on the scene have remote access to the CAD, or is that just something that exists?
No,
in
so the
control
CAD
room?
is just a computer-aided dispatch system that's used within the Emergency Operations Centre.
We can see from the transcript of that initial 999 call, we don't have to pull it up, that there was some confusion initially of the postcode, and you've mentioned that in your statement.
Yeah.
And resources were initially sent to SW11 instead of W11. In that call, the LAS handler refers to yet another address that doesn't match. Is there a problem with identifying addresses on LAS systems?
No, this was a user error. The address was incorrectly inputted into the CAD, which was why Southwest 11 was inputted instead of West 11, which was why a different location was coming up on the gazetteer.
Do you know whether that confusion over the address caused any delay in getting LAS personnel to the tower?
I don't believe it did.
Going back to your chronology, now on page 9 of your statement, at 0152, you say that the LAS updated the LFB by phone that the LAS had declared a significant incident.
Yes.
That's 10 minutes after the declaration was made within the LAS.
Correct.
Do you know why it took 10 minutes to relay this information?
Well, I wasn't there. I can't definitively tell you. I think probably from the declaration, what we would be doing is taking the steps that we need to take in terms of the actions that the Emergency Operations Centre would say. So, as I've explained previously, the Specialist Operations Centre would be opened up. People would be moved into that room. I think that's probably just a gap of getting people settled. And then obviously updating the LFB that we'd taken those actions.
Should it have been communicated sooner?
I think that's impossible for me to say. I think what I would say is that it is imperative that we get that information across to partners as soon as is practicable. I can't answer that question specifically because I was not actually in the Specialist Operations Centre when that happened.
Well, I suppose one could ask, does it look like a long delay, or does it look...
So from my
time you'd
experience in
expect?
terms of doing what we need to do to get these things take time. So I wouldn't say that was unreasonable. And to be honest, the information that we're passing to the LFB actually doesn't essentially impact anything that the LFB were doing. So this is really more of a courtesy message to say that we have upgraded that incident and to let them know that we're responding accordingly.
The declaration of a significant incident doesn't appear to be recorded on CAD 247. If it would help you, I can pull up the page that
Yes,
deals
please.
with that time period. So that's MET 19931, page 4. We'll just wait for it to go up onto the screen for you. Met 30-19931, page 4.
No.
19931, not 119. Yep, and then page 4 of that document, please. So if you just take a second to re-familiarise yourself with that page, Mr. Woodrow.
Yeah.
Can you see anywhere on that page where the significant incident is logged? In fact, I found it, it seems to be earlier, so it may be an error in your statement. At 0147,
Yeah.
it says significant paging initiated. Is that a significant incident?
Yeah, so that's once the significant incident is declared, that, as I say, then sets off a number of actions. One of those actions are then to page out that a significant incident has been declared to command groups.
But the update to the LFB is not recorded on the CAD.
No, it doesn't appear to be on that page, no.
Would you expect it to be?
Yes, I would.
And there is an entry at 0152 that says Met Pol aware, no ref passed. Is that a reference to informing the Met Police about the significant incident?
Yes.
And what does it mean when it says no ref passed?
So no reference passed, so no additional CAD, no reference, no new CAD, just associated with the original.
When the LAS informed the LFB that it had declared a significant incident, do you know if any other information was shared with the LFB at that time?
No, I don't. I would suggest from previous experience it would have been just a very quick call to say that we declared a significant incident.
And would the LFB know what that meant?
Yes.
Moving topics to liaison with the LFB on scene, we know that you weren't there on the night until later, but please answer these questions in light of your general experience. And if you don't know the answer, then please do say. Lawrence Ayunu says that when he arrived at scene, he was not sure who was in charge for the LFB. Would you expect that sort of information to be available to an IRO? So would they be told in advance who to look for?
So an incident response officer would look for officers, so officers and officers' tabards. So they would look for the incident commander by the nature of the tabard. I think when our incident response officer arrived on scene and actually was looking at the east aspect of the building, saw a number of LFB personnel who were officers, and officers are denoted by the fact that they wear a different colour helmet. And that was where the IRO first went to see whether he could get information around who was commanding the incident.
If we pull up Mr. Ayonu's statement, it's Met 000-10862 and page 5 of that statement. Okay, and it's just that first paragraph. You've mentioned his description of having seen a group of firefighters near the east face of the building. He says there were several other firefighters still standing there. I walked over to them. Someone in a white hat and a commander tabard then said, "It's not as bad as it looks. We believe it is an external fire and has not penetrated internally." And Mr. Ionu says that in light of that information, he was expecting to deal with patients with smoke inhalation only. You can't answer for him, obviously, but in general, would that sort of information affect the LAS decisions about how to set up on scene and what resources to deploy?
So I believe that we would be going to the London Fire Brigade for that specific advice around the type of incident that we were dealing with. From my experience, that would have played into decision making in terms of not penetrating internally, and I think that's the reason in terms of the comment regarding smoke inhalation, in terms of actually the integrity of the internal of the building had not been penetrated at that time.
So in your experience, would that have affected his decision making about where, for example, to set up a triage point, or how many people to have dealing with triage and issues such as that?
No, I don't think so. So I think that comment doesn't influence the incident response officers. So the incident response officer, by nature of the fact that he's declared a significant incident, is already into setting up the normal procedures that we would expect them to do. So it doesn't influence his decision to do anything differently at that time.
Paul Hammond, who's another member of LAS personnel who attended the scene on the night, says that Lawrence Ionu decided to keep the incident as a significant incident because the LFB said they thought the fire was superficial. I can pull up that reference for you. It's MET 30-14408 at page 4.
Which part would you like
Yes,
to
it's
look
the
at?
bottom paragraph. I think. Is that right? No, that's not, sorry, that's not the right reference. Let me just... Could you zoom out again and I'll just find the right bit? Sorry, could you zoom out again, please? Thanks. Yeah. So that same page, MET 144. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I think the reference in my notes are wrong. I'll pull out the correct reference later, and perhaps we can come back to my question so I can let you see the evidence. Yeah. So we'll pause that. Mr. Ionu then first meets with AC Rowe from the LFB at 2:23 in the morning, which is over 30 minutes after Mr. Ionu arrived on scene. Would you expect liaison between on-scene commanders to happen earlier than that?
Ideally, yes.
And is the only way of them communicating with one another on scene to go and find each other in person? Or is there a way of doing it via radio or some other way?
The normal way would have been to go and identify that person face to face at the command unit.
Other witnesses described similar issues with being unable to locate LFB staff. For example, Maria Conyers. She says that communication from the LFB on the night was virtually non-existent in her view, that the LAS could not locate the LFB safety officer early in the night, and that they would have been assisted by an LFB counterpart in contact and relaying messages that they received. We've been through the policies that emphasise the importance of communication between agencies. Would you expect there to be better communication on site between the LAS and LFB than as described by Ms. Conyers?
So I think we have to contextualise this incident. It was unprecedented in terms of its nature and its size. It undoubtedly was a very complex incident in terms of not just the type, but the other factors that were involved in the management of this incident. It is clear that communications were one of those challenges that night, and there are numerous references to people trying to attain situational awareness. I just think on the actual night that was just very difficult tactically to be able to achieve. So in a perfect world, yes, you would expect communication to have been much better than it appeared to have been on that night, but that has to be taken into the context of the operating environment that people were working in, and the dynamic environment of there were things ever changing on scene that night, and I think that all contributed to those challenges with communication.
So practically speaking then, does Maria Conyers' statement reflect your experience of other large incidents, or is it out of the ordinary?
So I think this was unprecedented. So from my experience, you know, as I say, the emergency services have a close relationship. They do work together. We do exercise together. I just think the nature and scale of this incident, and I think there were other environmental challenges that were in play there, which just made it very difficult. Information was shifting and it was changing constantly, and I think that just created a very difficult environment to maintain those clear communication channels.
I've now found my reference for that part of Mr. Hammond's statement, so we can go back to that. That's MET 30-14408, page 3. So if we could have that up on the screen, please. And zoom in on the third paragraph from the bottom. Starting with having liaised, sorry, third from the bottom, so starts having liaised with Lawrence, who has spoken to LFB commander. There we go. The commander has said the fire is superficial and on the outside of the building, and there are currently no patients. Due to the information from the LFB, Commander Lawrence has kept it as a significant incident. Just looking at the information that he received, so he's been told they think it's superficial and that there are currently no patients. Do you think at that stage it was reasonable to keep the incident as a significant incident?
So I think the incident response officer weighed up the information from the lead agency. He would have taken that information as expert advice from the lead agency, and I believe in terms of his overall decision making, and the fact that actually there were currently no patients, and we had sent a predetermined attendance that at that time he deemed it reasonable to keep it at a significant incident.
And is the fact of there being no patients a major factor in decision making?
I wouldn't say it was a major factor, but it would have been a factor from recollection. IRO also reflects on an incident of a fire previously where it was declared as a major incident and there were 3 patients treated. So I think in his mind he was trying to put all of this situational awareness, his experience from previous incidents, and come up with that option. And based on that information, he took that decision.
I've got one more topic that I think we can get through before lunch, which is the LAS's declaration of a major incident. And that decision to declare a major incident was made at 02:25.
Yeah.
And we can see that in your statement at at page 11. We don't need to pull it up. That was again declared by LAS Bronze Medics. That was Mr. Ianu. And he says that this was based on information from the LFB at that stage, having attended CU7 and spoken to AC Rowe, that fire survival guidance calls were reporting 40 people trapped and patients coming out of the building unconscious. The consequences of declaring a major incident include increasing the predetermined attendance. Is that right?
Yes.
And again, I think I can summarise that's 20 ambulances, 8 officers, 3 of which are IROs and 5 operational commanders, a tactical advisor, a command support vehicle with a command support team, medical emergency response incident team, ambulance liaison officers, hospital liaison officers deployed to appropriate hospitals, heart and central operations, and equipment support vehicles. Does that sound about
correct.
right? I've taken that from the LAS's policies. Is it right that a command support vehicle was dispatched but could not get close to the scene? Do you recall that from the evidence?
Yeah, so there was a particular challenge. There was a general challenge throughout that incident in terms of physically being able to access with vehicles close enough to the scene. I think part of that issue is that there were a large number of LFB appliances were already arriving on scene before we were notified of the event. There were large numbers of Metropolitan Police Service that were requested within the first hour from the time of the origin of the call, and that made it a constant challenge. And there are numerous references around trying to solve RVPs and try to get this issue of access definitively arranged. I think, from my experience, the actual area, the roads were quite narrow. There were lots of private cars parked, and then with emergency service vehicles, there was a real challenge in terms of clear access and egress.
What would you expect a command support vehicle to do at a major incident?
Well, they would locate themselves near partner command units, and that would be a place for the operational commander to base themselves. Obviously, they would be liaising with partner agencies, fire and police, but then he would be able to use that command support vehicle then to hold meetings with teams on the ground, be able to transmit messages through that vehicle back through to the Specialist Operations Centre.
And that vehicle would have access to that joint radio channel that we've already talked about?
Yes, so it has airwave communications on it. Yes.
So they'd be able to hear messages coming through on that from other agencies as well?
Yes.
Do you think the fact that the CSV couldn't get close to the site had any effect on LAS operations on the night of the fire?
No, I don't believe it did. I think the personnel from that vehicle made their way to the scene, and the equipment that the command support vehicle, in terms of the airwave radios, they were retrieved from the vehicle and they were distributed to other key members of our response. So in terms of for the Bronze Operational Commander, did he have a vehicle where he could get in and sit down and have meetings? No, he didn't. But actually, that didn't stop him having meetings. And indeed, his communication with his command team in the roles is very clear that there was good communication between Mr. Io and the rest of the command teams.
So might it have helped with better communication between the LFB command units and the LAS, or do you think that was already?
Conceivably, yes.
By the time you declared a major incident, or the LAS declared a major incident, do you know whether the predetermined attendance had in fact already been met on site?
So from my review, no, not entirely. But I think the decision was made in the Specialist Operations Centre once the significant incident had been declared that actually we were starting to deploy more resources. So from my review, by 3 o'clock, the full predetermined attendance for a major incident was met.
3 a.m, so that's about 35 minutes after the declaration was made. What are the other consequences of declaring a major incident?
So it sets up a number of actions in terms of the wider NHS. So in terms of hospitals, so once we declare a major incident and we put those hospitals on standby, or indeed we declare those hospitals as hospitals that will receive patients, it triggers those hospitals to take actions in terms of ensuring they're able to receive likely patients that we'll send. I think when we're declaring a major incident, we're also trying to deal with the major incident, but also trying to think of how we retain core service delivery to the rest of London. It triggers issues around our requirement in terms of deployment of all of our heart resources. So there was consideration then around if there was another incident in another part of London that required heart resources, how would that be managed? So it triggers off a whole host of actions outside of the delivery of the predetermined attendance.
But the SOC itself is already set up when you have a significant incident.
Yeah.
So does it have much of an effect in terms of the resources at command level that you deploy to?
Yeah, so once a major incident, then there would have been more staff would have been deployed from the Emergency Operations Centre to run the incident through the SOC. So more staff would have been allocated to SOC.
And was the LAS's decision to declare a major incident communicated to either the MPS or the LFB?
I believe it was, yes.
Do you know how it was communicated?
I believe it was through the CAD link to the MPS.
And to the LFB?
So I think that would have been Lawrence Ianu would have informed
On site.
the LFB commander on site that he was declaring a major.
That's a convenient moment for me, sir.
Is that a good
Yes,
point?
if it's convenient
All right.
for everyone else.
Well, we're going to have a break now, Mr. Woodrow, so we can all get some lunch.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you, please, not to talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Yes, sir.
And we'll stop now. We'll resume at 2:05. And if you'd like to go to the usher, she'll look after you.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you. And just for my benefit, Miss Grogan, how are you getting on?
I'm over halfway through, sir. So I suspect I'll be maybe 40 minutes after lunch, 45
Yeah,
minutes.
well, there's no rush. I just wanted to see how the afternoon was going to work out.
I
all right.
certainly won't take all afternoon.
No, all right. Thank you very much. 2:05 then, please.